This is Leading Detection, a Sedulo podcast where fraud fighters talk tech. Welcome back to the Leading Detection podcast. Today, I'm joined by Yinglian, who is CEO and co-founder of DataVisor. DataVisor is the fraud and financial crime prevention platform, which is powered by AI and machine learning, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Yinglian, thank you very much for joining us.
It's my great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Matt.
Awesome. So, we're going to be talking about fraud prevention and why moving forward it really has to be AI driven if we have any chance of keeping up. So, let's set the scene. We're going to be talking about the shift from batch to AI driven. So what does that actually look like when financial institutions are running on or still running on batch processing and rule-based systems?
Yeah, if you look at how we operate kind of in the past and in the past financial institutions, many of the transactions are designed to be batch in nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have siege transactions that take days to happen. So with the transactions happening that way, many of the other systems like fraud detection system also operate in batch, because there's no need for kind of real time that indication whether transactions are fraud or not. Also, if you look at the fraud landscape, in the past, the fraud landscape drastically different from what we are seeing today. In the past, fraudsters operate somewhat more isolated individually, and not to mention they don't have access to the AI kind of tools like we had. Even a few years ago, we started seeing deepfake, and even fast forward now, we are now seeing an entirely different landscape of, for example, anthropic mythos kind of a model. This is coming out to be so powerful, right? That's going to even and changing the entire industry landscape and changing the way fraudsters operate. So with that kind of background, financial institutions in historical are not set up to operating real time and protect transactions, protect consumers in real time fashion. Fast moving forward to today, you can see not only that the demand from the consumers for real-time payment significantly increase, and therefore the real-time payment needs has come up. More and more payments are shifted toward real-time. You have FedNow, you have RTP, you have many form of kind of, for example, e-transfer in Canada, etc., all started operating real time. And that means from a protection perspective, scrutiny each transaction perspective, that needs to shift to real time. That's not happening yet because the software kind of upgrade, etc., all takes time. And so many times, financial institutions definitely need to switch the way to protect them. And also, you mentioned a very good point of rule-based systems versus AI. And in the past, the same way analogy. And when we operate in batch, when the attackers are much kind of operating in isolation, smaller scale, we have time to react by people kind of domain knowledge. We observe what's going on. We figure out, what could be some strategies to defend against these attacks? We codify rules and we deploy in a reactive manner. And that probably works fine, but not in today's speed. And what's uniquely different is that not only we see attackers getting far more sophisticated, it's much harder to come up with these rules for human domain experts. Many of the things look very legitimate on the surface. And not only that, but the speed and velocity that they attack is phenomenal. So therefore, most of financial institutions in a recent kind of study that we launched and showed that the 74% of fraud leaders commented that the AI-driven fraud is a top of rank, but only 23% have talked about that they have the necessary infrastructure, they feel ready. That means they have the real-time capability or potentially already kind of switch from that rule-based approach to today's kind of AI-based approach to fight these sophisticated, far more aggressive attacks.
Do you think we've reached tipping point with these AI attacks, or are we still kind of slowly building up to what could be more catastrophic?
I definitely think at this moment, we're still chasing after the fraudsters. And so the adoption of technology has been rapidly evolved. Absolutely, there's a far more advanced, like from the protector perspective, from fraud fighter like us. We've been aggressively pushing out new technology. For example, recently we launched this first conversational also AI agent in the industry to fight against the modern day like AI fraud. On the other hand, the adoption from a customer perspective takes time. This is because from the defender perspective, from financial institutions, we're regulated industry. So we really need a governance framework. We need the governance, we need the committees, we need to scrutinize the new technology to make sure and they're safe, they're sound and principled to be deployed. On the other hand, the fraudsters, they don't have this. They don't have any model governance. They don't have any kind of essentially restrictions or scrutiny. So they operate at much faster speed. Until I think really from the defender perspective, we can evolve the speed of evolvement, speed of kind of innovation, and being able to not only innovate, but deploy these technology at a much faster speed. We will be falling behind, always chasing after.
So what's causing the friction? Why can't we be deploying these protection methods, protection technologies quicker? When you're talking to potential customers who are still relying on rules, what's holding them back?
I think from a willingness perspective, from the urgency perspective, it's definitely there. Everybody started realizing, yes, we need AI. So I don't think it's kind of from a mindset, we don't think we need it. But from a reality perspective, it's again putting on the mind for every new technology, we want to understand how it operates. What's the implications to data privacy, hallucination, right? From an AI technology, there are all these issues. They're not perfect yet. We're trying to understand where it can be applied, what's the boundaries, how we can govern it, and what is the sound principle. That takes a little bit of time from a customer perspective. And obviously from a technology provider perspective, like DataVisor, we want to make it easy to adopt, to also lay out the framework, make it as transparent, also providing that help to the customers for adoption for the governance framework. On the other hand, because I talk about these kind of the framework adoption, have a lot of human understanding needs to catch up. That's usually the bottleneck. That's where how we work together as fast as we can to figure out and where it can be applied, how safely we can apply it, and how fast we can adopt this. And in many cases from our own study, I actually feel pretty confident there are safe ways and manners to immediately deploy some of these latest technology to help us change the position in that fight.
And are regulators on board with this?
I definitely think this has called a lot of attention in the regulated industry in general, from both the financial institutions, from the regulator side, and on the other hand, everybody needs to do their job, and so there is a period, there is a time for everybody to come along and figure out what's the best approach. It's like also from data sharing perspective. And because for today's attack, many times we talk about, it's not they're targeting one specific financial institution, they're targeting and everybody, wherever there is vulnerability, there's target. There's a lot of discussion also potentially about sharing data, sharing intelligence as well. That sharing also needs support from the governance framework, from the regulators, and what's the best way to do that. And on the other hand, then you can see fraudsters, attackers are sharing tactics much faster and freely without any framework. Therefore, I would say from the fight against fraud, there's still the asymmetry across the speed of adoption of the technology. And that's causing some lag on the defender perspective. And can we take equal footing on pushing this forward? And many of these are more than technology problem, as we talk about. But at least on the positive side, think about the positive side is at least from a technology perspective, we ship be on the equal footing side. And we can
Mm.
potentially even do better because there are some technologies that can put us in a much more proactive position and to be able to detect fraud rings, these coordinate fraud at a scale so that we're not just looking at the fraud one by one. For example, like unsupervised machine learning is another approach that DataVisor is committed and have been recognized by the industry and the different players as a general approach to detect these fraud rings at the scale. So whenever these happens, we can catch them at all. And even at the sleeping kind of their early kind of sleeper cell stage. And so that's a good news part is there are tools, there are technologies available. And then on the last part, there are frameworks, etc., to help the entire financial institution for faster adoption.
Yeah.
So I think we need to simultaneously work on both of that.
How would you say the frustration levels are with the banks that they need more data, they need another tool, a different methodology? You know, we have to do more and more and seem not to be getting anywhere when it comes to being so reactive. How would you comment on that frustration in the industry?
I would say the kind of the multiple different levels could be from a frustration perspective. For example, first of all, as consumers and business, anytime there's fraud happening to all of us, we could be very frustrated, right?
Yeah.
That's one level, and that's I would say the ultimate kind of the loss and also the user friction is going to be the pressure of pushing this forward because none of us want to become the victims of fraud. And and from that perspective, and the financial institutions are having strong incentives and working
Yeah.
because of a customer perspective and to push this forward. And if we look at the industry trends, I think another positive signal is that there's a lot of recognition from the industry to move from that transaction-based kind of scrutiny toward customer-centric view, the customer's degree view. So there are a lot of advancement already, I would say, put in place of looking at protecting us kind of rather than just protecting this particular transaction, in which not only I would say is a different mindset, and but also does not result in best kind of the outcome, meaning things are looked at in isolation. If they do understand the customers, and there are fraudster side of the customers, and there is a good user side of the customers, and hopefully we can do things even early on much more effectively. And so I would say this part we're making progress. And the second is that in the past, many times when we look at these different threats, and for example, the account being account takeover and logged in versus transaction has also been in very isolated manner. There are probably different teams, different departments working on that. And it's also getting increasingly common for the financial institutions to realize these are connected issues. When an account is compromised, you are going to have downstream transaction fraud loss, right? And therefore, and that recognition has been kind of gradually adopted to shift the mindset from taking point solutions to a much more consolidated approach and adopting platform and build a customer 360 degree. And therefore, these are the measures pushing things forward. So I would say financial institutions, on the one hand, there's a general sentiment of frustration. There's general sentiment of customer friction and fraud loss building up. On the other hand, I wouldn't say we're completely without progress. And I think the entire industry has made a lot of progress. We just need to get to the next level of AI, kind of that AI level of velocity and speed, which is also very critical, particularly as we see very powerful large language models.
Yeah. So on a high level, in simple terms, how are we leveraging AI? Where are the main areas that we can use this technology to reduce this frustration and kind of be more proactive?
If you look at the evolvement, I would say a few years ago, and there's quite an increase in the interest in leveraging the traditional machine learning model
Mm-hmm.
and where you start seeing how fraudsters operate and what type of attacks, and having, quote unquote, having this training label data of
Yeah.
telling us which is fraud, which one is not, and then take that information to train a model that can predict the next transaction, whether it's fraudulent or not. And fast forward today, when we have access to much more powerful, like large language AI models,
Mm-hmm.
and that can dramatically and make things another big shift and different, right? What can we do with this brand new kind of AI technology? And that's where we started seeing there are many areas that we can apply it. And for one thing, for example, there are some tasks. The first application we've seen in the industry being very kind of a fast kind of attention and started getting adopted is the investigation kind of a particular review side. And
Yeah.
traditionally, when things are unclear, and we put into a review queue. And from a review perspective, there's a lot of evidence, and human operator needs to sift through to understand and then finally make that judgment. Is this fraudulent or this is a
Mm.
legitimate customer's behavior? And put yourself into a customer's shoes. And when your transaction is being put on hold, being reviewed, there is some anxiety, and it's slow, it's probably not efficient. And we have customers have thousands of these reviewers. So it's
Yeah.
massive. And with this AI technology, that's where they can compile this information and come up, think like kind of a human reasoning part, right? It's its strength, and can come
Yeah.
up with this automated alert summary and this narratives much faster to facilitate the review task.
Mm.
So that we can skip that evidence gathering and make rationale, but look at all the things not automatically gathered and described. So it's much more efficient. So this is a one area, operation side. I give you example as to you on the review side, things are being done. But
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, on the detection side,
Yeah.
and there is still a little bit lack of adoption. And until like recently, for example, from our perspective, we started taking also a little bit more aggressive approach to leverage large language models
Mm.
to jump through to say, hey, let's take a very aggressive approach, conversational. Before you have workflow UI for fraud strategies to come up with strategies and have to navigate through this maybe programming approach, UI-based approach, despite its local no-code, it's still a lot of manual work. Now you
Mm.
can just talk about the intentions and expose the APIs and MCPs on the underlying system level so that we can quickly turn into the intentions into very effective strategies
Mm.
and deploy in production. So much, much faster, much more instantaneously. And not only that, just think a little bit even more creatively. Not the next level step is whenever things happen, can the AI help us to understand what's going on? What's the attack
Mm.
pattern? Many times they can do also great work of doing data analysis and figuring out patterns and then come up with strategies. So from that perspective, we're almost having AI models can help us close the entire end-to-end loop, meaning
Mm.
from looking at the new attacks, kind of coming up and analyze the patterns, develop new strategies, test that strategies, and put that into production right away. So if we operate that way, then we literally have an agent, to have AI agents operate seamlessly at the attacker speed as well. So that's what we call, we can be for the first time much more on the equal footing, because we are not just having kind of human going through step by step, but the other side of the AI kind of helping them. We are also having AI agents in
Mm.
combating that same type of kind of fraud, different type of fraud at a much, much faster level velocity. So that's where I hold a lot of kind of, I would say, kind of a few optimism
Yeah.
toward where we're heading to is that we can now leverage AI to operate as fast as kind of the fraudster side.
And is this not just kind of scoring? This is the whole process. They're making the decision and the action, and there's no human involved there.
Well, human, as we mentioned, is a very important part from a governance framework perspective.
Right.
Because after all, right? And so for many of the regulated tasks, like financial crime, etc., and we also want to make sure it's a sound decision. And there are a lot of steps and human can get involved. But on the other hand, the human and can does not necessarily needs to manually go through these tasks. Human can rely AI as a tool to come up with the strategies, come up with the recommendations, and validate it, approve it. So our role is shifting to come from the ones we just manually do the work to we are the ones governing the model. We are the ones actually the brain behind the brain, right? Kind of to validate its work and to prove. So that's where I come to the bridge between technology and the regulated, like the governance framework is super important that we need to have a framework to be able to essentially govern how AI could work and certain actions, how you approve it, how the audit traces, why you come up with decisions. But on the other hand, I would say, and the leverage of AI can be in a way super transparent. And when things are transparent, when every rationale is laid out, why the model is making decision this way, here are the evidence gathered. It's it's not a black box approach. Therefore, what I mean is that while humans putting on this governance framework and the validator approve the work, we actually are going to be provided these evidence to facilitate to do the work. So therefore, from that task perspective, completely practical and feasible to operate at a both fast speed and have a sound approach to do that. So we don't have to compromise the level of speed and the level of intelligence, but being able to achieve the purpose of making sure we achieve a very sound framework to do it.
Yeah, and there's a trust question here, right? How would you talk about keeping trust when you're dealing with real people's money? When AI agents making decisions, people are a bit uneasy about that. What would you
Absolutely.
say?
This is where I commented before that we need the level of transparency and audit. And when the decisions being made, we need to understand the full kind of essentially the rationale behind that decision and the evidence of it. And so when we are presented these things and when human review it, we can come to this makes sense based on what we've observed. And then we need audit chases. The audit chases document what's being generated, what's being there, and why is this, and when the decision is being made and who made that decision. So that full loop gives us the trust. And I also want to mention, although we talk about the AI's role, AI agent's role, not everything is done by AI. And a lot of the computation, the data orchestration today can be still done by the tools in a very deterministic way. AI is just a layer of intelligence layer to rationale all the computational results and trying to help sift through a lot of patterns to make recommendations and then come with their recommended next steps. And the human are the one adopting this. And so that's where I talk about the transparency, audit, reversibility. When all of these are in place, I think we have a pretty kind of strong framework to mitigate that potential like margin for error and to make the best kind of decisions and to build that kind of trust. Obviously, eventually, it needs to be result driven. And that result driven approach can be taken on the test data. Because after all, whether it's a human decision or whether it's an AI decision, ultimately, we need to look at the results. Even for human mistakes, it's not 100% bulletproof as well, right? So in the end, how do we judge this is a good and sound principle is based on the results. Are we detecting fraudsters? Are we introducing frictions? to the legitimate users? Are we having kind of these data documented and in this compartment kind of a way and protected well? And these things can be audited, as I mentioned, as a full kind of decision trace and
Hmm.
as a final result. And this approach can be taken on testing days. So we don't have to jump right in the beginning to say, let's
Yeah.
go for production. And without testing, it works. With the testing data, we can see the traces and gain a level of confidence. These are all the measures can build up our confidence for the faster adoption of technology.
And I think it's needed. When you mention about improving technology, I think it was quite fascinating to see the idea about you don't always know what you're looking for. So a rule can only catch fraud that you've already seen previously. So I want to dig into how you find fraud patterns that nobody's even identified yet. So using unsupervised learning to spot new models, I know that's something very close to your heart, an original breakthrough from DataVisor, it could be said. So for someone who's not a data scientist, can you explain what it actually sees to find a new pattern?
Yes, this is something I'm always very excited about the tackle technology. We feel fairly robust to the different type of attacks agnostically and can
Hmm.
very effectively identify these coordinated fraud, even in their incubation stage and early stage. And the rationale, the approach works like this, is if you look at today's fraud, and they operate with a strong that monetary incentive, they need to make money.
Yeah.
And therefore, these are not amateur players just doing one-off things. These are coordinated, organized crimes. Essentially, we're
Mm.
about organized crimes. So without the rationale, what we're looking for is we want to look for these rings and coordinated massive kind of fraud. And that's how
Hmm.
it operates today. And so the difference in the past versus now is just the velocity and the scale are different. In the past, and these rings may be smaller, take a little bit longer time to launch. And for fast forward to now to today, there's a vulnerability, something, and boom, you suddenly see the level of scale and velocity, the big kind of a fraud ring. But
Yeah.
from a perspective, rationale is saying we have an unknown attack pattern. We don't know what's going to look like. We want to detect it early. And
Mm.
the key difference, the key, I would say, intuition we're capturing is that if you look at the legitimate users like you and I and
Yeah.
everybody, and so we operate independently. So we're more like independent variable. We don't correlate strongly with each other. There may be certain dimensions. Coincidentally, we might correlate. We all go to a certain type of event and
Hmm.
we get certain locations. But if you look at bigger time granularity, look at the more space, you will clearly find we operate differently and
Mm.
we're not correlated. But if you look at and these users or these accounts that are compromised and attackers, you will see much stronger level of correlation and
Mm.
coordinate. And this is because they're controlled in the back by the fraudsters in a way. The attack is launched in a much more kind of related fashion or
Mm.
correlated fashion. So the unsupervised machine learning is the idea is just sift through very high dimensional space. If you
Hmm.
again look at more events, more data, more features, you
Yeah.
will start finding that distinction of correlated clusters of behaviors and
Mm.
versus the legitimate users who are more random variables
Yeah.
do their own things. So that's a key intuition. And the recipe really lies into how we can have a very high dimensional space and a more kind of a high complexity and of so many dimensions features, but the real time identify the fraud rings and the emerging
Mm.
and be able to stop them. So this is what the database is unique at of leveraging this unsupervised machine learning, and we've
Hmm.
showed great success. And in many different areas, whether it's kind of financial institutions
Yeah.
or whether it's just looking at users' initial sign up and login, e-commerce and promotion, many different areas. And we've seen it work very robustly without needing to know what the attacks look like. Just to look for that coordinated behavior.
Yeah, maybe you could share a story where the unsupervised machine learning caught something that a traditional system missed or would have completely missed usually.
Absolutely. We found so many kind of fraud, like attacks in the range that cannot be detected by the traditional system. I gave a quick example. It's very interesting. And when we work with this kind of, I would say, large financial institutions, allows P2P, like a money transfer and sometimes cross-border payment, etc., we started finding a coordinated patterns coming up and completely missed by the legacy kind of approaches is where we see there are a number of credit cards being used and stolen credit cards being used to send money from player A to player B in a massive kind of fashion. And if you look at the transaction behavior, you will find it's different card and it's different seems accounts and they're not related with each other. And so these do not seem to be correlated. But if you zoom into it, then you started finding patterns. And first of all, you will see that the recipient's accounts are somewhat newly created. They're not used immediately, but they've been there for some time. It's kind of sleeper cells and then being activated to use. And there's always small amount of testing, a few dollars that slightly different, but under a certain threshold, like $5, etc., to get ahead of time. The card actually works.
Yeah.
And then there's a large transfer following that immediate, and then a dollar amount somewhat similar of whatever kind of maybe $4.99, $5.99, these kind of dollars, and we see the similarity and follow. And interestingly, as some of these frauds being detected, attackers switched patterns and changed behaviors. Instead of testing the card, they actually switched to say, hey, let's do a different type of bank transaction first. So they also switched in the middle of the campaign. They will switch patterns. It's actually the same large campaign, but they will switch patterns a little bit differently. And with this unsupervised machine learning, we can detect that switch of the pattern, that the two-phase approach, that as the initial phase started being detected and blocked, they switch different tactics. So it's also very interesting, fascinating. You see these kind of things going on, and but can be effectively captured by unsupervised machine learning.
Wow. So effectively their AI system is detecting that it's being blocked, so they've quite quickly
They shift the
changed
strategy.
tactics.
Exactly. You instantly start to see them. So.
And that's what can be picked up with unsupervised learning with traditional methods that would have been gone under the radar.
Yes, definitely, because they launch something, as we detect it, they start shifting tactics. Obviously, we pick up again. And obviously, from an attacker perspective, shift the tactics, hoping, then whatever, if you have a rule-based system, then for sure we're going to fail. We're going to say you're going to have a small amount credit card transaction for the large one. Now they shifted toward a small bank transaction with a large credit card. If you would have a rule in place, you would completely miss that second phase.
So there's no option really. We need to adapt. We need to start turning to more sophisticated prevention. Otherwise, it's going to be tough times for financial institutions if the change in strategy isn't made.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the good news is that we definitely see a lot of technology available. And so we're still holding very optimistic, and we can make a lot of progress here.
Amazing. So, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. We've gone from the old world of batch, the speed challenge of agentic, threats that no one's found yet, and how we can adapt to that. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear where you think this is all heading. What's coming up next?
From the next perspective, I'm a technology background, so I always kind of continue to kind of pay attention, love to see the evolvement of technology. And definitely very watchful what's upcoming. And I was kind of always hoping kind of with this different approach coming along, we talk about 360-degree customer protection,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
switching from a mindset of point solution to consolidated approach that
Yeah.
you can span across different dimensions of transactions because it's all now correlated together, and
Mm-hmm.
switching from the traditional rule-based approach and to more of kind of the unsupervised machine learning AI agent. And
Yeah.
again, with the AI agent, I really see that's another battle here coming up, and how we leverage AI agent combined with many of these, what do we talk about, different dimensions. And I don't want to kind of just say we put the AI agent and that becomes silver bullet, that's panacea. You need to
Yeah.
combine with many of these areas together. What do we just talk about, right? The 360-degree, etc. If we take an approach to put all these dimensions together, I think we significantly strengthen the parameter of protection and raise the bar. We can use it, but the way we leverage in the protection and make it harder and for penetration to come through. And at the same time, I understand there are also, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's also connected against many of the cyber leaks and directly resulting credential leakage. That
Yeah.
means what that means is next wave attack. And there are also other connected areas like financial crime, anti-money laundering, where DataVisor supports as well. And that's another area when you don't stop fraud attacks, a lot of the money will be funneled and laundered, and the resulting
Mm.
pressure on the money laundering part, right? These are all kind of dark side, all connected in cyber fraud and financial crime, money laundering. So I would say collaboration is also another next step. Technology, collaboration, and not to mention the awareness that many times we are still operating in the asymmetry speed. And
Mm.
as long as that awareness there, I'm sure one day we will flip the way. And once we get the sound framework, we talk about regulations and the governance. And I think there also needs to be work in these areas simultaneously to
Mm.
get up to there. So I would say all these areas, and if we summarize them, there are technology area, there are
Yeah.
infrastructure and area that we need to work on. There are governance framework that we need to work on. There are collaboration and sharing. And when all of these come together, I feel things can dramatically be very different to change the landscape of the arms race.
Mm. It's an exciting time to be in the space. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's looking interesting. What about for DataVisor? What about for yourself? Where can people find out more? What have you got coming up this year?
Well, for DataVisor, and we've been around for a while, we've been always kind of committed to being the leader of the industry in leveraging the most advanced technology in AI,
Mm-hmm.
combating variety of financial crimes and fraudulent activities. So for anybody who interested, you can always come to the website. And as to
Yep.
me, I'm a technology background. This has been my passion of developing, advancing the state of the art, and my background has been a lot in the past and of academic and the research world. So advancing the state of the art and leveraging the best technology for the next generation of protection and
Mm.
defense against fraud has been my career and my passion. And definitely love to continue to push that agenda forward. And obviously, DataVisor is where we're working to make sure we always stay ahead. So thank you, Matt, for asking that question.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, and that passion has really come through today. And yeah, if anyone wants to check out DataVisor, yeah, great work that they're doing in the industry and continue to do so. So definitely worth checking out and connecting with Yinglian on LinkedIn as well to keep up with the work that she's doing. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
And to the listeners, until next time, ciao for now. Want to hear more about fighting fraud with tech? Subscribe to Leading Detection wherever you get your podcasts.